Hi, it's Dahlia Remler. I'm back to talk about non-probability sampling. That's samples or ways of selecting cases, to use the language of qualitative research, in which you're not using probability or statistics to select who is in your sample, who is in your study. And sometimes that is for qualitative research, sometimes it's what you want, sometimes it's just the only thing possible. So one kind of non-probability sample is just what is often referred to voluntary sampling. You put an ad or a call out there and you ask for recruits. That is actually common in medical research. You'll see it for clinical trials, for volunteers. And we talked about how, luckily, for causal research from experiments, that's not as disastrous as you might think. It's a little more disastrous for things like, say, share of people who support or oppose gun control. Convenience sampling is a sort of general term for when you get people because they're conveniently available or easy to get. And a common example of that is psychology experiments that use university students because they're easily available. Another kind is what's often called snowball sampling or chain sampling or respondent-driven sampling. And this is important when you have populations that are very hard to get, like illegal drug users or gang members, and you're just trying to get anybody you can to gain insight. So perhaps you have a few people or a few homeless people, you know them, they trust you, and you get them to find more. And then you get those new research subjects or respondents to find yet more, sort of in a snowball or chain. A kind of sampling that's much more often used in quantitative research, that in which you're trying to get a representative sample, is what's called quota sampling. So you divide the population into a bunch of groups, exhaustive, mutually exclusive groups. And then you just try and find people within the group. Quota sampling fell out of favor as we've gotten much better ones, but it's come back into favor with a lot of online one. And in the probability sampling video, I'm going to talk about the difference between quota sampling and seemingly similar probability sampling methods. But basically, the idea with the quota sampling is you divide everybody into these groups. So that could be really well-defined groups like males, 25 to 29 years old, who are white, who live in the South, who are high school graduates without further education. And you'd get a whole ton of other demographic groups like there. And then you just look for anyone in that group. You don't have a list, a frame to randomly sample within the group. You just say, yeah, one 25 to 29-year-old male from the South who's a high school graduate, who's white, is just like anyone else in that category, and I'll take any of them, and I'll get a quota, and then I'll make sure that the share of each group is this, I weight them at their share in the population. So unlike the others, quota sampling is widely used in quantitative research. It is an attempt to make a sample representative of a population, but it is not a probability sample because once you're within each of those groups, you just take any comers. Other kinds of non-probability sampling where people try to get to be representative, or at least in some cases pretend they're trying to be representative, are some online forms. So these open web polls are kind of like the voluntary ones, but on the internet. put something on a website, on social media, you know, here, answer our survey. These are very often biased because of who's interested or who even sees it, who's there. So these kinds of polls, which are increasingly common, they're not very good for getting representative data, but they can be better for relationships or for digging deep into reasons. And they are increasingly used because they're increasingly possible. There are also internet access panels. And these have gotten much, much better over the last few years. And you get a bunch of people, a panel, they do this over time, who have agreed to opt in to participate in online research. Sometimes they're paid, sometimes they're given various incentives. And the idea is it's less biased because the motivation to join the panel is less obviously related than the propensity to respond to any one survey. So the panel will do marketing, and it'll do academic, and it'll do political. It's still a non-probability sample to be in these, although now I think 2 of the internet access panels use the sampling frame of the Postal Service to make at least panel participation representative. So they have a frame for being in the panel. Doesn't mean that it's a frame for being in the survey. We talked in qualitative about what's called purposive or purposeful sampling, where again, you're not trying to be representative, you have a particular purpose. Maybe you want dramatic contrast. Maybe you want people with a unique perspective. Maybe you're trying to answer a particular theoretical question. And that's can be used in quantitative research, but it's most often used in qualitative research. So here we have an example about sampling schools, and we want to get small succeeding schools and small failing schools. And we want to contrast succeeding, failing within both small and large, and we want to contrast small and large within succeeding and failing, and getting at the drivers of success and failure and how they might differ between small and large schools. Okay, that's it for non-probability sampling. Next, we're going to talk about some of the key aspects of probability sampling that enable us to quantify the errors we get because we're sampling.